All right. Zoom and Teams and my computer all don't like each other. So when I'm bouncing around, it takes me about a minute to context shift the apps. All right, everybody. Welcome again to the October 20th edition of the OpenSSF's Diagrammer Society. Do we have anyone new to the team that wanted to say hello and introduce themselves to our little club?
I mean, this is my first meeting, but I don't want to be on the team, but I can introduce myself.
You just say hello.
Hi, I'm Josh. I run the SBOM Everywhere SIG, which is stream 9. I think it's stream 9. And anyway, I've got a proposal we're going to talk about in a little bit, which is why I'm here. So hello.
Awesome. Welcome, Josh. Anyone else want to introduce themselves to the group?
Yeah. Hey, I'm Bob. The chair of the technical advisory committee for the OpenSSF. Wasn't able to make the last meeting due to a family conflict, but happy to be here.
Awesome. Welcome, welcome.
Hi, I'm Jay. Trying to make a good attempt at being everywhere at one time.
We call that a Randall.
Yeah, yeah, it is a Randall. It is a Randall. But happy to be here. Happy to assist in any way I can, and also happy to learn. I find that joining all of these meetings and becoming an active participant, I'm learning a lot, right? So I'm happy to learn.
Awesome. Welcome. Anybody else interested in saying hello? All right. Do I have a volunteer or volunteers to help us scribe the meeting notes today? Very useful to folks that are interested in this topic but can't make it. You'd be surprised how many people I get asking me about updated meeting notes. If anyone can help out, that'd be wonderful. Everyone is welcome to contribute, so don't feel any stress that you would be the sole savior of the call.
You just add them to agenda, right? Like where the agenda is, right? Just underneath stuff.
Yes, please.
I will try to do my best.
Groovy.
I'm on a computer right now, so.
Thank you much. You're on an actual computer this time, Randall?
Yeah, my actual Gen 2 computer.
Wow. Awesome. All right. If anyone has any opens, we'll discuss those after Josh gives us his little chat about some SBOM Everywhere work they're doing. So please type that in. And Josh, I yield the floor to you, sir.
What are opens? I don't know what that means.
Do you have something new that is not on the agenda you'd like to talk about?
I understand. Okay. Yeah. So I'm at this meeting because the SBOM Everywhere SIG had a readout to the TAC on Tuesday. And one of the things we're proposing is putting together a landscape for SBOMs. And if you haven't seen it, let me pull up the URL. There's this thing called the CNCF Cloud Native Landscape, and it's really cool. I'll put a link in the chat here. I'm not going to share my screen. This thing, like, it makes my computer not like me. It's enormous. But anyway, one of the things that we're dealing with in SBOM Everywhere is trying to start getting a handle on just everything happening in the space, because you can imagine it's pretty bananas. And many of the participants have said we want a landscape. And so we're putting together a proposal. I have a link in your notes. You can click on it and go to the document. But we're putting together a proposal to basically see about paying some consulting company to build a landscape for SBOM. And when we said that, I think it was Chris and Ava said, we're doing similar things in this other group over here. We should all talk. And so that's kind of why I'm here, is to get a feeling from this group, like, is is this something you want to do? Is this something we should do and report back? Or like, I'm completely open. We haven't really started doing anything in this space. It's just an idea we have. And so obviously if we can collaborate, that makes way more sense than Lone Rangering this still. So like that's my thing. All right, questions, comments, concerns?
I'll state this is our second ever meeting.
Right.
It's been an idea we've talked about on email. So I don't know that we have a opinion on a direction yet, but do folks have feedback for Josh? And we've talked about the CNCF landscape and their trail maps. So they seem to have some pretty decent diagram artifacts. Anyone have any particular feedback for Josh about the idea of snapping all the universe of SBOM into a diagram, and that is more like a reference implementation to show an end consumer on how to SBOM and what options are available. Matt.
Yeah, I'd love to see a first draft, just like kind of like a pass of what tools, what areas we'd see in the landscape, that type of thing, like much like the diagrams you have right now, Crobe. Because I worry about pigeonholing a tool into one given category, because I'm releasing a tool in a week or two to OWASP Foundation that's multifunction. Yeah, my teams are releasing a couple tools. And there's tools that are going to be announced hopefully next month that will create new areas. So yeah, exactly, new things. So I'd like to see how, I would like to make sure that we're, like I said, what are the big swaths of things we're putting in the landscape? What, give me a first pass of what that looks like.
So the plan, I mean, the way you should look at the CNCF landscape, I don't know if I put a link in the GitHub repo in my.
No, I have the poster. I mean, they pass them out at every booth at every conference for the past 5 years.
But here's the important part: is the landscape is controlled by a YAML file, and so like you will have the ability to literally add and modify your metadata for your tool as you see fit. So if you want to put it in multiple categories, that's great. If you don't like a category it's in, that's great. And the initial seeding of the list is going to come from the current NTIA documents, which I know are out of date, but it's at least a start. And then the idea is if we can bootstrap this, then we can have folks like you come in and send PRs to, fix data or add data or kind of whatever is needed to be done.
Any additional thoughts for Josh, Matt?
No, same request. I'd like to see a first pass against some set of tools.
Look, the first pass is NTIA docs. We're not going to do a first pass because we're not going to do the work. We're going to pay someone to do the work. And then they will obviously create a landscape. And at that point, like we've already paid someone, it's probably too far down that hole.
Do you have a time frame?
No, I mean, we have to propose this obviously first and get funding. So who knows?
But much like Crow produced, maybe you can, I know you were in the last call, but do you have like at least a high level design of what the areas would be in the landscape?
It's all in the NTIA documents.
If you can pass me a link, Josh, I could do a mock-up for you real quick with Lucid or Visio or something. Just to do a rough, if you scroll down further in the document, you can see I gave the group some proposals of artifacts we might want to work on. So I could swag something up real quick for you. And it would be useful if you're going to pay somebody to show them this is what we'd like to see.
I mean, that's fair. I have no talent, so I would love that.
I would be glad to do that for you.
Yeah, I'll dig them up and pass them along.
Cool. And then I'll take the CNCF as a reference and I'll draw something up just to kind of see, is that what you were thinking about?
And I know we are already discussing the SBOM, we had references to issues to lists. So there's existing guides that are outdated, maybe 4 years old, guides of tooling assessment that was done 4 years ago. And there were certain categories of SBOM tools there, but I think there are more categories than that. I think that looking at the full life cycle without having, you can reference me to the document, I'll look at it as well. I just don't know if it covers areas like fingerprinting. Does it cover areas, like the full life cycle, like dependency track, defect dojo, does it cover those things? Is that on the radar? We have to give input to whoever we hire, as you were saying, Krob, guidance on what other sources there might be, and plan for the future of all the things perhaps we're producing at OpenSSF and are evolving at other spaces as well.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I mean, but at the same time, I'm also very aware that perfect is an enemy of the good, especially at OpenSSF. Because there's a lot of stuff that doesn't go anywhere because people just bite shed the hell out of it. So
I'm just asking for a good high level design. How about that?
and that's fair. And again, like the NTIA, like I just put a link to the PDF.
Cool.
And they have a list of tools. They've got a list of, the tax money used to classify the tools. And that's our intent, is to literally start with that, because the NTIA spent a lot of time putting this together, and we're not going to get to that level under any. It'll take us 6 years to get this one. In fact, it probably took them 6 years to get where it's at.
I'll be glad to donate an hour just to do a couple swags.
Yeah,
to
that's epic,
possible
man.
organization,
That's
and then I'll circulate that around. We don't have we toyed with the idea before. Are we interested in setting up a mailing list for this? We have a Slack channel. I could definitely dub in the Slack channel, or would we prefer mail?
I prefer Slack, but I don't care. I have a lot of emails from a lot.
So is the only document this presentation that has produce, consume, transform as the 3 categories?
There's from quick searching. I know there's some other stuff. I need to talk.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen that was the LF documentation I was referring to, and that actually is a high level overview presentation about the actual guides. There are 2 guides produced, which lists all the tooling. And
do you have that handy by chance?
No, I didn't plan to talk to this today, so no, I wasn't on the agenda. But I'm just saying that those high level categories, those 3 categories you reference, are not enough for a landscape.
No, I agree. I completely agree. Like we know this is very incomplete. We are well aware of that.
And Matt, if you have time in the next couple days, if you could post a link into the Slack channel again,
Yeah,
I can take that as a reference.
Yeah, I'll find the links to the guides. I'll provide that in the meeting notes. Absolutely. But I'm saying that I went through every tool in that guide 1.5 years ago and evaluated them for my company for usage for SBOM, and it was deficient and it was outdated. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. And again, this is why we want a landscape, because updating a landscape is very easy. Updating this material literally can't be updated because the NTIA group that did this doesn't even exist anymore. Like, these documents are dead.
All right. Randall, you had your hand up, sir.
I was just gonna +1 the idea of including the SBOM tools in our diagrams. So my only concern would be that it ends up being bigger than our diagram, so it ends up being like too big, but that'd be minor concern.
Oh, for the original outcomes we were looking for this group, it doesn't precisely align, but as we've talked about, we'll need implementation reference architectures for people to take some of these concepts and actually apply them. And one of the ideas, the proposals I have, kind of shows something along that line. So this definitely a related effort, and I'm glad to assist to try to just do some mock-ups to try to see. And I will state, over the years, when you have things laid out in a diagram, it's easier to see where there's gaps. So if we identify, hey, there's only 3, NTIA only accounted for 3 areas, and between all of us, we agree that there's 8 more, like, great, let's add those to the diagram. We could denote these are future areas or currently missing. So we have a lot of opportunity once we can visually kind of look at the thing. It's sometimes easier than digesting a 20-page PowerPoint.
And I guess one other thought I have is, if you're interested in something like a landscape, we could make sure if we do want to get this done and we want to start with SBOM everywhere, we can make sure one of the outputs, because obviously someone's going to have to take the CNCF landscape, un-CNCF it, and we can make sure they create like a template landscape that can then be used for whatever, and then create our SBOM landscape.
Mm-hmm.
And then obviously your crew could reuse that and do as you wish.
Crow, can you make sure that in the notes I captured what you said correctly?
What did I say? I mentioned that the SBOM landscape may be slightly out of scope. Over to the SIG. It's our purpose here was to try to draw a picture that articulates what the foundation is, what all the different parts are, and how they relate. But again, it's a very similar skill set, and we've directly talked about we need some type of reference implementation. How are we going to do secure supply chain without a map to do that? And this SBOM thing will help people do SBOM. So it's definitely something that I would be very interested in trying to help put together, because I think it's the community would benefit from that.
Bob, where did this come from?
I forget whether it was Jory or Jen Bonner had sent it to me a long time ago, and I just was searching my mail and I dug it up. So I think the code is there. I know I'm being recorded, but I don't know that there's a lot of value in rendering just the membership in such a diagram, but I think maybe this is enough of a shell that kind of accelerates some of the learning there. That's the only reason I threw it in there, was not to reboil the conversation.
It has a SigStore tab.
Oh, it does?
Yeah.
So that's how they generate the graphics for the website and presentation. Like when we have new members, she goes in and modifies a file. And this is similar to what Wheeler had shown us with Mermaid. Basically, there's a control file and you kind of define the layout of the diagram, and it will automate the loading of it.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, I think the late Dan Kahn had a hand in crafting this because it was originally created for the CNCF. And it became very necessary for them because of the complexity of that ecosystem and the way it sort of exploded exponentially. The current draft that you shared there is, it's almost like analogous to what's on the basic HTML web page. So it's an interesting and somewhat daunting challenge to try and step back and look at the security ecosystem landscape. And I don't know how they actually care and feed it. I think it must be self-service on the CNCF is my speculation.
The CNCF landscape, yeah, it's actually an enormous YAML file. It's like a 20 megabyte YAML file at this point. One file, which is like chef's kiss. But like anyone can submit a pull request basically to that file.
Yikes.
And something like, go ahead, please.
No, sorry. Hi, guys.
Oh.
Jeff is right. I mean, the landscape, there's basically a tool that was developed initially for CNCF, and the Linux Foundation is reusing that tool all over the place. If you go to landscape-hyperledger.org, for instance, you'll see that. And basically, they have this engine that can display this, kind of structured data, and they use it. You can actually, it's fairly generic, so you can choose what kind of data you want to display. They typically do that for showing the different projects, the different working groups you might have, and indeed the membership. But it's fairly flexible. And I know that when Krub first presented the idea of, having this kind of like organizational structure diagram, that was Brian's reaction. You may not have caught that, but he said, oh, but maybe we can use the landscape tool for this. And Jory, who was very familiar with it, said, no, you would not be able to do that with it. So, there are limitations, obviously, to what you can do with it, but that's what it's about.
I also know that the LF AI and data uses it as well, because that ecosystem has gotten quite large.
Any additional feedback or comments for Josh?
So I guess my ask is, does this group have any intention of like taking this proposal over, or do you want the SPOM everywhere to just continue slogging forward with it?
I personally, for this group, I don't know if this is something that we will take on as a group,
Okay,
but I will be glad to do some mock-ups for you.
sure,
And
sure.
to, based off of the data we have, I can show you a handful of views that you guys can maybe will at least strike up conversation about what's missing. That might help you with your gap analysis.
Sure, sure.
I'm glad to
Okay.
do that. That I can probably get that done before I travel next week.
Awesome. All right. So I'll just treat this group as informed and I'll keep you in the loop of what's going on. And I guess that we can chat again in the future if we need to.
Yeah, and if you do come up with a useful, reusable tool, that might be something that when we get down the road where we want to,
Yeah.
how to apply salsa, we could potentially, drop that into that tool to kind of articulate how to deploy if that was a thing we needed.
Right, right. Perfect. Good.
All right. Thank you. If you want to go, you may. Otherwise, you can stay and watch us
hang
talk
on.
about pictures.
Yeah, pictures. are fun. I like pictures.
All right.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. I truly
Mhm.
appreciate it.
So we had talked last time about homework, and we had asked everyone to kind of think about ways to represent the foundation, and if anyone had any drawings or ideas of good examples of things, we asked the people to kind of put those thoughts together. So I did several different views of different techniques of displaying information. We can talk through and see if anything kind of sparks joy. That's something we may want to, that path we might want to go down. Obviously, these are all very raw and they're incomplete. But if you scroll down the meeting notes, we have view 1, which what this would be is we would align the representation of the foundation off of things like our vision. So in a previous call, Bob submitted a proposal for what the TAC is thinking about as a new vision. So we would take those things and put them as pillars, and the actual symbol is, it could be whatever. We could have it be geese, we could have it be a square, a try. I don't, that's irrelevant. But basically, you have some type of container that says this is the pillar of the type of thing we're talking about. So, for example, pillar 1 in the diagram is our goal is to be excellent to one another. And you would line up below that and show, well, that's what working group 3 and SIG 4 help us achieve that vision. And then, under the pillar 3, open source all the things, we might have more things within the foundation. So we have 2 working groups and 2 affiliated SIGs, and then an unaffiliated SIG that all help execute on that vision. So that's one possible way to show the data. And that and our output may not be just one diagram. I suspect we'll probably have multiple ways that we want to present this. See you, Jeff. We have multiple ways we might want to present this. And, as we are talking, so if, for example, we're doing a presentation at the governing board about the new vision of the TAC, we might have a specific diagram that organizes the data in this way. The next view 2, and this is very similar to what David had shown, Randall.
So these are your diagrams,
Right.
Okay, I just wanted to write that.
I will give you a link to the Lucid file, but that's been hit and miss on access since I don't own an account. It's a free account.
That's all good. I just wanted to make sure I got everything.
Yeah, I drew almost all of these, if not all of them.
So diagram 1.
I didn't draw 6
Okay.
or 7.
So view 1, just for the notes, how would I explain it? Is displaying how like the values get split up.
Yeah, this view is based off of values or mission. That's just a way we can display that information and then organize it accordingly, show how things align by that mission or those visions.
All right, sorry.
No worries. View 2 is similar to what David had shown us, where he actually has a diagram that he takes around as part of his presentation decks. Yes, Bob.
I wasn't meaning to interrupt you. Go ahead and finish.
Oh, no. So basically, he has a diagram where it aligns and shows, the governing boards at the top, the tax below, and then he, lines up all of the working groups underneath that. It was a very simplistic diagram, and it just shows this is more of a hierarchy. So that if that's the the way we need to describe that, how things report up, that is another way that you can represent the data, is kind of have the like a pyramid almost, where the top is the top, the governing board rules everything, the TAC helps execute on that, and then here's kind of prescriptively what we're doing. And you could even line projects or initiatives up underneath those working groups there.
Yeah, that's basically an organizational chart.
Yeah. So now would you like to ask your question, Bob?
Yeah, I unfortunately have to drop for a different call,
Sure.
but I wanted to leave, drop the mic as I walked out here. I have an affinity towards view number 4, which kind of skips ahead of your dialogue a little bit.
Mhm.
But what I guess I would say is the reason why I think number 4 is attractive to me is because it frames it in the audience rather than as internal organizational chart looking outwards. So taking people on that, choose your own adventure with the OpenSSF view, I really do think that there's something to that I think really, if we can find the right balance of graphical representation as well as kind of fitting into a broader picture there, I think that would be super helpful to many outside. Back to the earlier conversation around positioning, I think org charts are great, but it still leaves people going where do
Serves
I
a certain purpose.
Yeah.
And then there's nothing to say we only make one diagram. We
Yeah,
can
for sure.
munge the data however we desire, whatever is useful. And I also like the persona view myself.
Yeah, so cool.
All right. So any thoughts on the org chart view 2 view? All right. Next up would be view 3, and this would be, we would do a diagram more like a implementation reference architecture, kind of like what Josh was asking around the functions or the desired tasks within making an SBOM. So we would take something like securing the supply chain, and we would lay out a map of these are the relevant things based off of these functions or tasks or workflows, and align up the different pieces within the OpenSSF underneath that, so that someone could take that roadmap and potentially start actively executing on it. And I just made up all the words, so don't. Those of you that are salsa-ites, don't yell at me. Don't be too harsh. So any thoughts about this type of view?
I don't dislike it.
I personally don't feel that's the main representation of the foundation, but I think in certain cases, especially where we have active prescriptive guidance, like within supply chain, I think and SBOM, I think it would be very useful to have this in our back pocket and have it in our diagram universe.
Yeah. If it helps at all, Glenn has an animated version of the OSWAP. Oh, I have a problem with that word. That one organization with the WASP. But yes, he has an animated version of that, how that breaks down. It might just be good reference. I know that there was a lot of political things that happened in creating that, but the way they have it is they have it separated like in categories. So like requirements and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
And I didn't have time, ran out of time But another view would be, and I actually met David showed us one where he actually had a diagram that talked about from a CI/CD perspective how our different elements and initiatives lined up. So
Right.
we also, another view could be a traditional SDLC view, and we could drop everything underneath that.
Right.
Although there's much debate in the SDLC community.
Yeah.
Is it a circle? Is it a figure eight?
Yeah.
But we could figure that out.
Yeah, I was surprised you didn't have that diagram from David in there because I actually do like it.
I ran out of time and I didn't have the link.
Don't get me wrong. I'm not blaming you. I'm just saying I think it is an interesting
Mhm.
point of view. He basically used the supply chain CD pipeline with all the that has been developed to show the different points of attacks, right?
Mhm.
And he lists for each of those points what are the activities in OpenSSF that are trying to address those points. And I think one interesting aspect of it is it actually, can help identify the possible gaps we might have because it shows what we're covering, where there's overlap, and where there may be gaps.
Mhm.
I was trying to find the reference to that slide actually, but I can't find it right away.
I added a view 9 as a placeholder down in the bottom. So if we can find that,
Yeah.
we'll put that there as something to think about. All right. View 4, the persona focus. So from that, we would take a statement like, as a developer, I want to, and we would have specific tasks that the developer executes on. So if they want to write more secure code, best practices working group has lots of things to help there. If they want to learn about tools, we would fob them over to Josh's group potentially. So you would line it up based off of those user story statements. And so we would need to agree on what personas we wanted to focus in on. But this is, again, another way we can represent all the work we're doing and actually kind of drill that down to initiatives and projects and SIGs and everything. So any thoughts about the persona view? Bob expressed his opinion.
I also like it.
And again, I imagine we'll end up with several different pictures depending on who the stakeholders are and kind of what their viewpoints that we need to address. All right. View 5 was the picture we started off with last week. I call it my circles and boxes view. This was my attempt to draw a map of everything today that the foundation is doing, organized by effort type. So the circles are working groups, the squares are projects or initiatives, the hexagons are SIGs, the diamonds are projects. So we have different types of things. And you could take some type of picture of this is everything we do. And if we invest a little more time, we can show how there's relationships or collaboration between the groups. With this type of diagram, you could show what the state of a project or initiative is. Is it incubating? Is it mature? Is it retired? So you could do a lot with something like this. And then potentially we could spend some time to talk about, the best practices group and the end user working group work a lot together. So we might move those bubbles closer to each other, for example. Whereas the securing critical projects and the identifying threats probably work a lot, but they don't necessarily interact with some of the other projects as much. So we might physically move them in the diagram. So this again is a representation where you try to show everything and provide the viewer a way to I cut off the legend, but there's a legend that would show what the different shapes, the shapes have meaning.
So it's an interesting text, but I think it's closely related to view number 2 in the sense that this is essentially some view of an organizational chart of the OpenSSF organization groups and projects and so on. I think it, in terms of the kind of information it's communicating is similar to view 2.
Mhm. And the view 2 is more hierarchy based. This is more
Yes.
function based. But yes.
But it's quite different, in my opinion, from what we're just talking about before. That's more like, architecture oriented.
Yeah, you couldn't hand somebody that and they could implement it. And that's not the intention of that.
No,
particular
exactly.
diagram.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good way to put it.
We're just trying to document a complex system.
Yeah.
Or actually, I would use a diagram like this in my practice as trying to document a security program, trying to show how the different components within a program operate. All right.
By the way, if I ever botch anything that you guys said in the notes, I pre-apologize and please correct me.
No worries. No worries at all. All right, so moving along to view 6, Jonathan Meadows from City sent this over to me. And this is probably too late for him to attend, so we may potentially change our meeting time in the future. We'll see how that goes. But he had sent this over, where this is a diagram where he thought about the OpenSSF, and this is kind of similar to the CI/CD view of where we have a process diagram. And we could potentially, whether it's an SDLC process or a supply chain process, we could line things up and kind of show flowing through that system. So that's another way to represent the data. Yeah, feel free to resize things. I just put it on there so at least.
Sorry, I was trying to
no
see
worries, no
something. It's too small. I can't see this.
Yeah, so
Here,
thi-
I'll
this
put a
is-
link. This is actually a link to the diagram there.
Yeah, this is one of the diagrams that I've used, or that I've been using to kind of draw a picture about, when I talk about salsa, the S2C2 framework. I even talk about Guac now. I'm talking about what's happening over in the CDF with their supply chain maturity model, the testation life cycle. This framework from John, and he actually said this to me a while ago. This is what I've been pointing to, saying, hey, look, this is something more complete than what I've seen. Maybe can be built out a little bit more on with this group and then with others, but in terms of like it's end-to-end look at supply chain, I haven't seen anything quite like it. So I like it. I like this one a lot.
Mm-hmm. And when you have a well-defined process, it's much easier to put it in like a workflow diagram like this to represent the connections. But how would you account for the identifying threats or the securing critical projects group in like a process? That would be a little bit. You couldn't hand that to an end consumer to actually execute on. Whereas this, again, if you're do CI/CD, do supply chain, do SBOM, this is something very relatable and very useful.
Yep.
Any additional thoughts about Jonathan's diagram? All right. After the call last week, I don't know if everyone saw, but David, we talked about a diagramming tool called Mermaid, and he jumped on that within a half hour or so after the call and kind of whipped out this picture. And it gives you, it's more of the hierarchy view, but it kind of shows you what's possible with current open source tooling. So if we wanted to call it a day and be done in 5 minutes, we probably could leverage something like this and throw up the mission accomplished flag if that was the style of diagram we were looking to do.
Let me say that there's also GraphViz. I was gonna respond to David's email. So that one's actually a little bit more complete. Like it could do a little bit more, but you wouldn't be done in 5 minutes.
Yeah, but it's basically you define what the shapes are and you define the connections and you start dropping them into a file, which is going to be very similar to how that the landscapes were built. So it's, you know,
I think that
file.
I think one of the pros on this was that we could store it on GitHub as
Mhm.
or as like a configuration file.
And it's very easy to update once
Right.
it's all defined.
Right. And I think GraphViz has that too, but it's, as I said, more extensive.
Mhm.
And with GraphViz, you can make all sorts of diagrams. So just saying.
Yeah, the sky's the limit. We just need to decide what we like and what we're interested in investing time and sweat into. But if we wanted something very easy, very quick, we certainly could do something like that.
I do really like the idea of like having something generate the diagram. I really like that idea because I have no creative ability. Which is probably why I'm a good programmer.
Any additional thoughts about the mermaid GraphViz idea?
I'm afraid it's limited to how much we can, put into into this. It's like you get a very basic structure. I don't know how much, you can't, can you change colors and add shapes and whatnot if we want to add?
If I'm diagramming a network, with Nmap, this would be great to dump that table into and draw a diagram and how systems are connecting. I don't know if it's good to kind of represent what the foundation is doing. And I agree. It's, there will be some ability to change things, but we definitely won't get the options like Jonathan had in his chart where we have, numbering and bubbles and different types of iconography.
Exactly.
It's going to be, this will be circles and boxes.
To correct. Technically there is if you search hard enough, but then it's a matter of how much pain you want to go through. Just to be clear, technically correct. Which is really where you get Mermaid and GraphViz, because GraphViz is like, it's been around forever. Like it's what AT&T invented back in the day to make diagrams. And it got real complex real fast. So they were like, let's make Mermaid, which is way faster because it like fits most use cases. But keyword most.
Yeah. And if you're looking at a commercial tool, I can do something similar with better graphics with like Visio and an Excel backend. We won't say that very loud on this call. But that is a tool we could use, and it will do something similar.
I think there is like an open specification for like Visio and OmniGraffle and all that stuff.
Yeah. And then the other view we talked about was the trail map, and then I'll try to find the example of David's supply chain view. So do we think out of these 9 or 10 different pictures, do you think we might be able to narrow in on a couple we'd like to do some more in-depth exploration of?
So I think I'm glad you said a couple, because I don't think we should, take responsibility for maintaining, a whole bunch of those. It's going to be hard enough to keep anyone up to date because things keep changing. I think I see value in having the two kinds in general at a high level. Is one that's kind of organizational chart oriented, telling me what is the governance structure of OpenSSF and
Mhm.
a global view of all the different projects and working groups, which we all have been starving for. And which is why when you came to the tag with your graphic, everybody was like, oh, this is fantastic. Because it shed a light that was just missing entirely. But the other part, I think, is more like reference architecture oriented. And there, I think there are different possible approaches. We would have to figure out which one we want to take. But I think that's also a very interesting point of view because as I said earlier, I think it addresses the kind of stuff like, telling people where things fit in their, how they can use it for what and how things relate to one another. And again, possible gaps in the, overall coverage from an OpenSSF point of view. And I mean, we can also include things that are done elsewhere. It doesn't have to be limited to OpenSSF. It could be rich enough to say, oh, but I mean, things like SPDX or Cyclone DX maybe can be referenced there, whether they are part of OpenSSF or not, right?
Yeah, and I think especially with like SBOM, where the OpenSSF is sponsoring the SBOMs Everywhere project, but SPDX is housed externally. It's LF, so
Yeah.
we would show that there's a relationship and it's a component, but not necessarily that there's any kind of ownership over here.
Yes, exactly.
Randall.
So do they is there ever because here's my question. I bet that all diagramming tools are kind of somewhat difficult. So my question was going to be, because do we need a front end? Are we going to eventually need to build a front end? Because it's almost easier to just use HTML and CSS than it is to use GraphViz or Mermaid and get it all to work correctly there.
Well, and then the one proposal there, if you want to click on the CNC trail map, this is another type of view that we could take, and it is very graphically rich. And that's something that we would potentially, send out to an agency to graphically embellish. So that's another option for us, is to do that kind of user journey story. It's another way to view this.
That's interesting.
And it doesn't speak to what Matt and Arnaud were talking about, where I want to know how to implement this. But this, at least, this is a pretty little fluff piece that again helps kind of draw the viewer in and explains a little bit. And you could link off of all that. I think in the actual diagram you can jump around and dive into those projects.
Interesting.
But that's another view, and it has a dragon, so that's kind of cool.
Yeah, it is kind of cool. What is that, LLVM?
I just think it's a dragon hanging out. Those dragons are cool. Actually, there's a bunch. There's like a bunch of dragons.
Yeah, there are actually several of them.
And a cactus.
Apparently, the CNCF landscapes in Game of Thrones. It's in West.
Yes, so they're playing some D&D. But that's another type of view. Once we figure out how the organization is organized, we can represent it in any, we can slice and dice it however we want to. And I agree, Josh. Yes, we don't own anything, but we are the stewards of certain things. Like SigStore was donated to us, Salsa was donated to the foundation, so they're the caretakers.
Well, I guess I'm just going to jump in. Well, no, hands up. My point of that more so, Chris, I guess, is there's like things that OpenSSF does, but I think this is what makes the SBOM landscape we're proposing so different. Is this isn't like the OpenSSF. This is
Right.
The world.
Right.
We want to account for everything.
Right. And the amazing people at the OpenSSF helped assemble that and add value to the world.
Totally right. Well, we want to be the center of gravity, right? We're the thing keeping everything in orbit is the idea.
one of my concerns is how are we going to do this without using commercial tools? And you know where I come from, there are strong opinions about, for example, why does OpenSSF use Zoom? Like, and it's just, I feel like, I don't know, I kind of feel like we
Does
kind
anyone
of
use Microsoft Teams?
have...
Because no one does.
You're not hurting my feelings. You're not hurting.
No,
No. You're not.
and it wasn't intended to.
Oh man, but you know what, you get my point that like there's opinions around the community that like it needs to be open, it needs to be open source, it needs to be easily accessible.
Josh and I used to sit through all the tirades about how Red Hat used to use Blue Jeans, and they
Oh,
were
yeah.
up in arms about Blue Jeans. Like, it's just a tool. Just want to log in and do my work.
Yeah. I actually legitimately got an email on my comms rail for Gen 2 about why we don't use Nextcloud. And I was all, have you ever used Nextcloud? Just out of curiosity. It's terrible.
Yeah, but point taken, wherever we can, wherever it's viable, we would want to leverage open source tools. But I can't dictate to an agent. If you go to an agency, I know they're going to be using Adobe products and whatnot.
Well, the reason I say that is because I know that there's going to be, why isn't it on GitHub? And then now we're talking about tools that are compatible with GitHub, and that really starts narrowing your selection down.
And the core data may exist there, like as a YAML file or whatever, something in GitHub. But the different views we may need to leverage outside tools to render.
Right.
But if I may, I mean, just saying it has to be on GitHub alone is not even quite enough, because I mean, Lucidchart, I like I said last time, I played with it because one of my concern was when I tried to access it, it asked me to log on, create an account and stuff, and I was like, okay, we're not going to be able to use this, to for the final publication. And so I looked into it, and in fact, it actually works pretty well because you can export in SVG. And so you could say, hey, I can export in SVG and put the SVG in GitHub. But, nobody wants to edit SVG by hand to go to the next version, right? I mean, I don't.
Yeah, and Lucid is a free-ish tool, but is not necessarily open source. Yeah, I mean, there's like a draw.io is another diagramming tool I use that might be more open source-ish. We can figure that out. So we're nearing the top of the hour. I thank everyone for their time. I would ask everyone to think through the examples we've shown. And if you are very passionate about one type or another, let's get that opinion documented in the notes or talk about it in Slack. And that way, maybe at the next call, we can start to make some plans to do some more thorough diagrams than like a quick 5-minute swag like the ones I did today. That sound acceptable to everybody in the next 2 weeks?
Yep.
Yeah, as I said, I think it would be good to agree at least fairly quickly on the kind of diagram we want to have. I mean, I suggested we have two, and if people feel differently, I think it'd be good to hear that. And if we can narrow down on the kind of charts we want to do first, then we can narrow down for each of them which kind we would prefer, what style, and then we can go from there.
Yep. Please, let's use the Slack channel as kind of our let's start expressing our opinions or sharing ideas, and we'll see if we can get things narrowed down to a couple. Like Bob, I agree that the user story one and personas are very powerful. So that's probably something that would be a secondary artifact we create after the primary ones. But I feel that that's probably something that would speak to a bunch of our constituents, potentially the developers. But we need to have things that actually you would implement. Yes, we need a traditional implementation architecture to hand somebody to do. But other people will react to a pretty picture like the trail map potentially more And that would be easy to print that out and put on a giant poster board and take to conferences. Like, oh, have you heard about the OpenSSF? Look at all these cool things we do. We have, turtles and geese and penguins. It's great.
Dragons.
And dragons.
Could just get a goose costume for someone to walk around in. That would probably be more effective than any other thing.
I'd wear it.
Well, we had yeah, exactly. I was going to say Crab will volunteer, of course. He already has the hat.
I've been trying to strong arm my youngest kid to be a school mascot. The blue bear.
You get real popular with those jobs.
I'm not going to do like jumping on a trampoline or splits or anything though.
I actually used to promote events. I used to promote events dressed as a Teletubby over here at the Irvine Spectrum.
All right. Well, thank you, folks. I appreciate your participation today. Again, let's keep the conversation up in Slack. Thanks for stopping by, Josh. And we'll, find me those extra documents, and I'll draw you up a couple of diagrams to kind of share that you can strike up some conversations amongst the group and share with whoever you're in a third party it out to.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, Chris, I don't want to like overburden you. I think the PDF it only has 3 categories, but I think that's plenty for the moment.
Super easy.
Yeah.
I added links you asked for. They deleted the old document. They reset, did a reboot, and as indicated, this in the notes. But I would
awesome.
suggest,
Thanks,
I would
man.
suggest before bailing on the 3 categories, look what the Cyclone DX Tool Center has done. They have a catalog
Okay.
which has more than 100 tools, and they have different category tags. I think that should inform our high level design.
Okay. Yeah. Awesome. Thank you. Yeah. And I love doing this. That was my favorite thing when I was practicing architecture, was drawing circles and boxes. So I love this part of it. It's not a burden. I have a whole presentation about circles and boxes. It's great.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, gents. Appreciate your time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.